Hello, everybody. This is Gerald Celente. And once again, we are honored on this January 25th, 2023, to have with us Judge Andrew Napolitano. As I say, there is nobody that I know that knows the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, the details, the ins and outs, the ups and downs of it, than Judge Andrew Napolitano. And we're with him today about one of his articles coming out. That's just another it's very repetitious, Judge. It's just another article of how they're robbing us of our freedom, our life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And the thing called the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, it's as useless as toilet paper, because that's what they've done to it. And you have an article here, how local cops get your bank records. This column has recently outlined the suspicious arguments offered by the feds when they have been caught spying on ordinary Americans. They argue that the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution, which requires a search warrant prior to spying, only applies to law enforcement and not to domestic surveillance. The argument not only defies the plain language of the amendment, it defies history and common sense.
You know, the feds just keep spying and spying. We know that. I've written about it. You've written about it. We've talked about it. What the Wall Street Journal revealed and what I write about last week is something I never heard of before. A small bank clearinghouse in Arizona, which is the central collector of data for funds that are wired out of the United States and into the United States, generally by middle class and poor people who use Western Union and MoneyGram and Euronet, standard commercial wiring entities. All that information is gathered there and made available to police just by requesting it. How many police departments request it? Over 600. This includes the federal police, state police, and local police, without a subpoena from a grand jury, without a search warrant from a judge, in utter and direct defiance of the Fourth Amendment. And if you wire funds out of your bank account using one of these international wiring services, then this outfit in Arizona can look into your bank account and see all deposits and all checks cleared and who you wrote checks to. Why would 600 police departments want this? Because their appetite for spying on innocent people is voracious, and they can't develop probable cause of crime to persuade a judge to give them a search warrant. So they've gone behind our backs, below the radar screen. The public doesn't know about this. Mainstream media didn't know about it until the Wall Street Journal broke the story last Thursday about this sneaky, crazy, old-fashioned bank clearinghouse in Arizona, which just gives away information to any cops that ask. You know, when I was on Fox all the time, my buddy Stuart and Varney, a Brit, raised in a tradition where the government spies on you from cradle to grave, used to bust my chops and argue with me. There's no more privacy in America. There's no more privacy in America. Why don't you admit it? You know what? He was right.
Yep.
He was right. We think we have privacy. We don't. This is the lowest level to which I have seen small town cops sink, that they would get this kind of information about poor and middle class people, as to whom there is not one scintilla of evidence of criminal behavior.
Well, you know, John and Nisha Whitehead, they write about how the police have really robbed us of our rights and keep doing this over and over again. And when you talk about the Brits, you misspelt it. You got to put an S in there rather than a B. It's the shits. And what you do here in your article is you talk about how when the founding fathers revolted against the king, how they knew that that was happening, and this is why they spied on the people with the Stamp Act and other unjustifiable and freedom robbing acts that they push through. So when I say that like what Varney said about we have no freedom, you're like the Brits, we've become like the Brits in so many ways. The sun never sets on the British Empire. Look at all the wars that America has caused illegally into so many different countries. We become we're back to the UK.
Correct. We have built an American empire after we broke away, seceded from Great Britain, and their empire began to deteriorate. What did Iraq or Afghanistan do to harm American persons or property or national security that justified our invasions, and in the case of Afghanistan, our occupation for 20 years? Nothing. What is Russia doing to harm America by attempting to recapture land that was Russian for 300 years in the Ukraine? How does that harm us? Not at all. But yet, the governments like to kill. This is the Gerald Celente phrase that everybody should hear. When all else fails, they take you to war. When the president's going to be investigated for improperly storing classified documents and he wants it off the front page, he'll take you to war. And what did he do yesterday? Against the advice of his military advisors, sent 24 tanks to Ukraine so that the Germans could send 12 of their tanks to Ukraine. We'll never get that money back. The people operating those tanks will be slaughtered, and the Russians will continue their march toward Kyiv.
And what they're selling is that little clown of nothing, Lindsey Graham, just went over to Ukraine, along with two other, Blumenthal, or whatever the guy's name is, another arrogant clown from Connecticut, and another jerk from Rhode Island. They went over there. It hardly made the news a couple of days ago, January 22nd, and talking about Lindsey Graham saying how terrible it is that the Russians invaded another country. And if we don't stop this, this is going to continue. They're going to continue to take more land. This is the Lindsey Graham that there's not a war that this little low-life piece of garbage didn't love and vote for. And he's talking about the Russians?
Yeah, this is the Lindsey Graham who said we should send CIA agents to assassinate Putin. This is the Lindsey Graham who wants World War III. This is the Lindsey Graham, an acolyte of the late John McCain, who also never met a war he didn't like. But this is the Lindsey Graham who shares the globalist attitude of Western Europe and the American State Department, that we should fight this war in order to tell the Russians how to govern themselves. That's Lindsey Graham.
Yeah. And what really is so disgusting is how the media is only selling one side of this.
Yes.
They're selling the government side. They have no one on that talks about the real facts of why this happened. Again, as we detailed in the Trends Journal back in 2014, when it was a quarterly in spring, article by Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, former Assistant Treasury Secretary under Ronald Reagan, about how the United States was overthrowing the democratically elected government of Viktor Yanukovych. None of that's ever talked about. None of the violations of the Minsk Agreement. None of the talk about how the Ukrainians have killed some 15,000 Russian people in the Donbass region, the separatist region, when they didn't want to go. You know, I love this. You know, it's such a big deal about what happened on January 6th, you know, but they don't talk about how they attacked